Good afternoon, America. As you can see, I am not Iron Man. It is Asynaka Willis. Sin, keep it simple, keep it easy. I'm normally moderating the chats, and I'm your host today. I'm your guest host today. Matthew is running the show, so it's basically the two of us trying to, make sure that we put together a solid program for you guys. I'm going to actually, borrow a moment from Yvette and kind of give people time to, there's this term, roll in slowly, before we get started. Okay. There's this term, one of us is a professional. So, I've been very vocal about the fact that having to follow after your first show has not particularly been one of those things I'm excited about. I mean, you're normally a pretty quiet guy, and your show, first of all, I didn't even know that Matthew had a philosophy group. It's like, Matt, I knew you had a fan club because the chat won't let me forget that I'm not you. I also want you guys to see that we're here at the same time. I did not replace Matthew the intern. He's here. He's right. See, right here. I can't replace Matthew. I can't do the work Matthew does. Trust me, I assure you. You'll see kind of that as I stumble through today's episode. So how was your weekend?
My week was it was uneventful, I would say. My philosophy professor, delayed my essay, so I just had one of those weeks where you're supposed to do something, but you didn't do anything, which is a good week to have. It's a good week to have. How was your week, Marcus?
Very different than that. For those of you who do not know, I work with a charity when I'm not doing several other things. And last week, the charity did a lot better than I expected, but this required lots of public appearances. I do owe a thank you to a lot of people. So if you donated, if you shared, whatever, thank you. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what we're still doing wrong about HIV. And not going to be a fun topic. So hopefully I can inform you and keep it at least somewhat, doesn't send you for a drink afterwards. And that's the best I'm hoping for, is that and Matthew to roll the opening.
Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I paint the White House black and ain't no future in your front.
Welcome back. So, little technical malfunction there. We're going to jump right into today's topic. And to do that, I'm going to have Matthew show you guys a clip.
Last summer, when over 100,000 black Americans gathered at this religious convention in Atlanta, when for 3 days ministers preached to a rapt audience about the Bible, family values, virtue, vice, and God's plan. No one talked publicly about a silent killer, an epidemic familiar but forgotten, that today is hitting black Americans in stunning and disproportionate numbers. AIDS.
The epidemic has not ended in the United States. It's only changed in who it impacts.
Black people make up 13% of the U.S. population, but over 50% of all new cases of HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. That infection rate is 8 times the rate of whites.
In America, AIDS is virtually a black disease by every measure.
Black women are 23 times more likely to be diagnosed with AIDS than white women.
We should be in the streets. Everybody should be in the streets. Everybody should be freaked out.
As of 2004, more than 200,000 African Americans have died. Still, despite these stunning statistics, AIDS is a topic that remains underground in Black America.
Silence is now suicide. The Black American silence on this issue is suicidal.
In the future, people will look back at our generation and say, what were they thinking?
The African American community.
And that's the question. What were we thinking? So what we've done is de-incentivized being tested for HIV. And it is absolutely the worst approach. To be perfectly honest, if you look at the history, we have done as much wrong as we could possibly do in how we handle HIV. Now, some people will be upset because, yes, people are living longer, and that's important. That's good. But we had an epidemic on our hand and made it worse. And today we're going to talk about how what we should have done differently, and what we can do moving forward. So let's start out kind of with a basic understanding of some of the issues that are faced by people with HIV that are problematic, that aren't disease related, like policy. So in 21 states, there are laws on the books that make the idea is that they're supposed to protect people. There are laws about having to notify your partners. Now, let me be very clear. I do believe morally you are responsible to notify anyone you have sex with of your HIV status. I actually think you should be talking about all your sex history, but I mean, we're not even gonna go there. Frankly, if you are having sex with someone who you wouldn't give your PIN code to, there's some problems. Yeah, like, I mean, if I can't trust you with my debit card, I probably shouldn't trust you with my health. And that's what you're doing. When I normally do this, I do this in a large group. Thank you. Thank you. I normally do this in a large group. And one of the first questions I ask, especially if I know it's a group that's familiar with each other, is I ask everyone to raise their hand if they use a condom or some other form of protection from STIs every time they have sex. Would you believe that not a single person doesn't raise their hand when I ask that question? I follow that question with, now look around the room. If you have had sex with somebody in this room who has their hand up right now, both of you know y'all are lying. I mean, I don't have to expose them, but they now all know. I'm not saying don't trust everybody. I'm saying recognize that you are trusting people with your life. So yeah, that's one thing. So laws about how we have to notify people are a big deal. It's part of what people call the criminalization of HIV, because whereas most laws are designed where the burden of proof is on the prosecution, HIV laws are kind of a gray one in a lot of places, and that's due to stigma around HIV, and none of the laws are based on science. For instance, in the state of Georgia, if someone who is HIV positive spits on a police officer, they have committed a felony. We are making a felon out of somebody who spit on a police officer who was HIV positive, even though we know saliva does not transfer HIV. So what's the logic there? Who are we really trying to protect there? Or who are we punishing? Prisons. Prisons are a breeding ground. We're going to talk about this a lot later. Prisons are a breeding ground for HIV for a lot of reasons that I will let the video explain when we get to it. But Do we have mandatory testing for HIV in prisons? It's not like we can't impose it. They impose many other things on prisoners. Sterilization is, yes, sterilization, slave labor. I figure if you're going to have a free workforce, and let's not lie to ourselves.
We could keep them alive.
Yeah, you can at least try to keep them alive. But the problem is if you encourage them to be tested for HIV, those private prisons and state-run prisons would have to pay for the meds and pay for their health care. So they don't want them to get tested. And that's a problem, because it's affecting more than just them. Matthew, if you would be so kind as to jump into clip 2.
Drugs. New state and federal laws that unintentionally sent the epidemic into overdrive. The war on drugs meant sending thousands more street-level drug offenders to prison, men who were more likely to be infected with HIV from dirty needles. Since 1980, the U.S. prison population has quadrupled.
We're doing mass incarcerations of black men in America. More college-age black men are in prison than are in college. Many of them go into prison HIV negative, come out HIV positive, and we don't have a strategy to deal with this.
Prisons are notorious breeding grounds for HIV. Infection rates are 5 times higher than outside the walls. Sex between men in prison has been the subject of only a handful of studies, but one study by a national police organization found that at least 40% of inmates had had sex with another man in prison. And despite strong evidence that condoms reduce the spread of AIDS, they are forbidden in all federal and most state and local prisons.
To make condoms available in prison would be to admit that sex occurs in prison. And for some reason, the prisons don't want to say that happens. But if we want to encourage HIV transmission, it's the perfect policy. I think that would be the way to do it.
Then in the 1980s...
So, I think terminology is important. You're going to hear me use the term MSM, which is men who have sex with men. The reason that's an important term is that I don't define someone else's sexuality. And when you put people in a place where things are not normal, they may do things that are not normally what they do. So I don't want to define them as gay, bi, or any of those things. We're just going to use the men who have sex with men. So in prison, thanks to the war... Serious, determined to make me look bad today. So back in the 90s, under President Clinton, he commissioned a study to determine if needle exchanges would really help cut down on HIV transmissions. And guess what? They found out they would. This seems like a simple, okay, well, we're going to pass and do it. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And you're asking why. Well, the GOP fought it on the grounds that it would encourage drug use. But before you start blaming just the GOP, keep in mind that President Clinton had a lot of power in his sway. He had a lot more power at that time, except a little problem popped up. He couldn't keep his pants up in the office. So suddenly all of his political clout was gone, and so when this bill came up, he no longer supported it, allowing the GOP to kill needle exchange programs. Needles exchange, yeah, it is crazy, no condoms in prison. Needle exchange programs would drastically reduce it. One of the things that we know happens among prisoners is that people go into prison and find new ways to cope. One of those ways is drug use. Well, once again, a needle is actually the best transmission kit for HIV you can get. It's designed to hold blood. Blood stays in a needle, and it actually is sterile the first couple of times, so it keeps the virus alive. So needles are actually, a needle exchange is an essential part of the plan. We begin the war on drugs. We're now putting low-level offenders in mass incarceration, exposing them to the need to find ways to cope, and hence the drastic increase in the HIV numbers. Now, you'll note that those videos are all from about 2004 to 2006. And there's a reason why I'm starting back there, because I really want to show that it isn't new that we've been doing this wrong. We've been counterproductive in this area for a real long time. Now, what I'm hoping you're not saying is, well, they're druggies or anything along those lines. Just toss that out. Remember, drug use is not a reflection on a person. It's an addiction. We treat it like an addiction. But we're not treating this addiction in every way we possibly could, like ensuring things like clean needles, needles exchanges. Man, if you could get needles with insurance, it sounds like universal insurance would be a lovely opportunity. But we seem to not let that happen either. So what should we be doing becomes the question. This one is a little complicated, but simple. We should have the same approach with a drug called PrEP that we have with birth control. Now, for those of you who don't know what PrEP is, and I would not be surprised if that was a lot of you, because I talk to doctors and medical staff who don't know what PrEP is. It is a drug that is taken, one pill on a daily basis, that is 98.3%, I believe are the exact numbers, prevention towards HIV. It stops your cells from being able to absorb the HIV cells. And literally, in the United States, if we put young people, I'm not even going to say male or female, on that the way we put young women on birth control, one generation we wouldn't have HIV, because they'd never be able to contract it. Now, as an educator, I personally do tell people I advocate a 2-cover system. So, if somebody's on PrEP, that doesn't mean you don't use a condom with somebody who's HIV positive. You don't go, oh, I can just do that. That's great. You want to take as much responsibility as the other person, because it's you who deals with that. So yeah, that's a big deal. People will talk about condoms, and I would love to spend 30 minutes talking about condoms. But let's be honest, no one likes them. No one likes them. Nobody. Look, I get it. I understand. No one likes them. I mean, someone once said to me, I won't call my brother out on this. Oh, oops. That men get married so that they can stop using condoms. I didn't particularly believe him at the time, but I got several nieces and nephews now, and I'm getting the idea here. But the idea that condoms alone are going to be enough, no. I know there's some of you out there talking about how condoms break. If a condom breaks, you put it on wrong. I assure you. I give this is the weirdest part of the speech. You'd be amazed that when I talk to groups, how many men would like to imply to me that it simply won't fit them. I can get a condom over my fist. I'm just saying, it'll go all the way over. I didn't think to bring one because normally I have to think about what a school will let me bring. And in Georgia, when I do HIV education, I'm not allowed to bring condoms to campuses. Because somehow, that's a problem. So yeah, let's talk about our education. I was talking to someone about doing this today, and literally they said to me that they grew up in, I don't exactly remember the county in Georgia, so I won't call it out. and they did not have health or sex education. And so that's kind of a problem. Two, I can tell you from experience as a sex educator that even when you have it, so some school districts have taken a brilliant approach where they bring in an outside group to do it so that the kids can feel comfortable and not have conversation and not have, problems asking questions. Their teachers are still sitting at the end of the aisle. They have to see those teachers every day. So if I have to try to get students to open up and be honest about what they don't know, I need the teachers to go away. Nothing against teachers. I love teachers, mostly. Normal. Okay. Teachers are okay. But I can recall at least one event where a teacher specifically was part of the problem. Her students wouldn't ask questions. I could see them turn to look to her for approval. And if you're not going to let an educator educate them, you might as well just get used to the idea that, we need to come up with some other plans like making PrEP available just straight off the bat. I mean, it's not a if, and, or what. Literally, the numbers say that men who have sex with men in the Black community by 2020 will be 50% HIV positive. No matter where you stand on the behavior, if you'd like to continue, you'd probably like half our population not to be in a place where missing a pill could cause some death. And that just assumes they get tested. The stigma around HIV keeps people from getting tested all the time. If people find out I have HIV, what am I supposed to do? Now here's the other way it's been de-incentivized that's a real issue. Remember I was pointing out how people who are HIV positive and aware are legally required to tell their partners? People who don't know their status, guess what? They can't be held accountable because they didn't know their status. And I actually respect that. But what you're telling people is, it's better not to know your status, because if I find out I have it, I suddenly have this new responsibility where I have to notify people that I am carrying something that is a stigma. And God forbid you be a heterosexual male and HIV positive. The fact that there are groups specifically for heterosexual men who are HIV positive because no one supports them. You must have done this. Look, he said it earlier in the video. HIV is not a gay disease. As a matter of fact, if we run the numbers, it's now a Black disease because we're the ones suffering the heaviest under it. And a great example of that is San Francisco went last year with the largest drop they have seen in their history of new HIV cases. That was pretty impressive, San Francisco. The South, where HIV, by the way, is also one of the biggest issues health-wise being faced, saw an increase in new HIV cases. And that's reported. Once again, keep in mind that it is still commonly believed that about 40% of people who have HIV don't know they have it. And so they're just walking around, like they're fine. Oh, and for the love of God, stop with they don't look like they're sick, so I'm going to use that as good judgment. No. By the time they look like they're sick, you're way past the problem point. Like, that's not how that works. So, terminology that also matters. This one is directed more at the gay community. We don't help with the stigma for HIV. Shock, stunned amazement, especially gay men. We notoriously use terms like "I'm clean" as a reference to "I don't have an STD." Well, that implies that anyone who has one is dirty. Yeah, that totally makes people want to go get tested and see if they're dirty. I mean, so like, we talk about community and being together, but we do things to undermine that on every level. You don't have to support the idea of someone's, I was about to say life choice, and I refuse. No. Someone tells you you're gay, you don't have to be happy about it. But if you care about that person, the way you claim to care about their soul, you'll care about their health as well. And you want them to get access to the help they need. And that's the simple one on that. Specifically about the criminalization, there's a case I want to bring up. Will you bring up photo 1? I am not Iron Man. I cannot memorize all that. The way that man's brain is huge. So, I mean, he does. So this is Michael Johnson. It's a 23-year-old who was convicted in May of 2015 of recklessly infecting a partner with HIV, 1 count of attempting to recklessly infect a partner with HIV, and 3 counts of recklessly exposed. Now, normally, burden of proof is on the prosecution. Innocent until proven guilty. Oh, hold on. I'm sorry. Look at that picture again. What? Innocent until proven guilty, huh? Yeah. That works out real good for the group he comes from, black men. So we're not going to go down that lie. The prosecution used a narrative around HIV as a terminal disease, which by all technicality it is. And that suddenly shifts the burden to the defendant to prove that he notified people. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever been in that moment and had to think about how am I going to pull my phone out and videotape this conversation where this person who is ready right now says, yes, I told them that I was HIV positive, and then go back to that moment. Because that is technically what we are now making defendants do. Because anything less than that, and they get convicted. It is not uncommon. In his particular case, I'm sorry, I'm looking at a quick note. In his particular case, the issue was whether or not, he told people and whether or not it was a terminal disease. Well, let's talk about the terminal part. HIV with treatment is more manageable than diabetes or high blood pressure. So if we get people to get treatment by getting tested, which we've disincentivized, they live long, healthy lives. So selling it as the terminal also shifts the responsibility off of the newly infected person to get treatment. You run into another problem. The availability of treatment. HIV meds are not cheap. Now, we've heard a lot of people talk about healthcare. We talk about healthcare a lot. one of the reasons we know prisons don't want to have people tested is that they don't want to pay for the cost of the health care. And while I in no way want to help prisons, I do want to help people in prison who may be HIV positive. And it turns out recently, here in the Athens area, we've been really lucky to have a candidate, Richard Winfield, who believes in what he refers to as super Medicare, which is coverage for all with no deductibles. A program like that would absolutely make it worthwhile to test everyone and their grandmother and give them the pill because, well, it's being paid for. So why aren't we doing this? I don't have an answer for that, to be perfectly honest. I don't understand how we're not demanding this as a community. IME talks about how Dems love to tell us that thank you for saving us, you know, from Roy Moore. Well, IME has pointed out the hookworm situation in Alabama. Let's talk about the HIV infection rate in Alabama's prisons, because it's higher than anywhere else in the country. People who go into Alabama prisons are 3 times higher than the national average to come out HIV positive. You want to thank us? Maybe you should get some of those people that happen to be mostly black. Meds, testing. Prison can choose to make testing non-optional. Now, out in the world, there's what's called opt-out testing, which has been pushed and suggested repeatedly. Opt-out testing says that whenever a hospital does blood work for you, they do an HIV test automatically. And if they find, they come tell you so that you can start dealing with it right away. This, for people who feel like this is an invasion of privacy, you opt out. You choose not to be tested. But for other people who are not being tested because they don't believe they have any symptoms, they don't believe they've been with anyone who put them at risk. Once again, let's not lie to ourselves. Every partner tells you, no, I've never done any risky behavior.
I'm here with you though.
This is the first time I've had unprotected sex. Like, come on, who buys that? And let me be very clear. The audience is pointing out things, you know, the things you hear, and I've heard some of them. I have legit heard some of them. I remember talking to a young lady in high school, and she said to me that, you know, her boyfriend convinced her to have sex because, you know, he felt like they were at that stage. They were at that point. How could she not love him enough to do it right at that point? Now, y'all are going to be mad at the boyfriend. And don't get me wrong, it's a jerk move. High school students are jerks. So we have to teach both of them to stop being jerks, or also teach both of them to take some responsibility. If you make the decision to have sex with someone without protection and find out that you have gotten what I will call a simple STI versus a not so simple STI, HIV, you don't have a right to be mad at them. And I know it's really easy. You're like, well, that's easy for you to say from your point of view. You know, you haven't had to do it, but I have. I got my status as HIV positive in June of 2014. And I made some decisions right off the bat. One, wasn't going to keep it a secret. Wasn't going to be even quiet about it. Wasn't going to be worried about it. As a matter of fact, I took such an obnoxious approach to being outspoken about my status that I made a YouTube video because I didn't want to have to tell my family 17,000 times like the story and just posted it on Facebook and waited for them to see it. Not everybody can do that. I understand that. I respect that. But that's the level we need to be at. This needs to be a conversation we're having every day, all day. If you can't talk to your pastor about your sexuality in a world where by 2020, 50% of black gay men will be HIV positive, guess what? You need a new pastor. Not even a question. You need someone you can talk to about the things you need to do. And they need to know it. I got to meet with a bunch of pastors and talk about what they were doing wrong. And they were I'll give them credit, they were very understanding, and I was not nice. We were doing a HIV education at their church, and one of the other educators said, "Is it okay if we put condoms out?" And I looked the pastor dead in his eye and I said, "If you tell her no, I'm walking out." I'm like, I'm done. I'm like, I'm not gonna waste my time. Because if you won't even let condoms in, none of the other stuff I have to talk about is gonna be worth anything. But I also decided I didn't have a right. And I knew how I acquired the virus. I didn't have a right to be mad. I'm a grown man. I made a decision to have unprotected sex, and that's that. I am aware that the person knows that they are positive now, but I've also never let them know that, they infected me. That's not a burden that they should have to carry because I made the adult decision. Here's another hard thing to think about that decision. Imagine that you do it, you feel fine. You go months feeling fine because it can't be detected for the first 3 months. But you can spread it in the first 3 months. And by the end of the first 3 months, your viral load is so high, guaranteed you're spreading it if you're having unprotected sex. Imagine how it feels to know that every person who trusted you, you put in danger. Because that's what I really need people to think about when they're not getting tested. If you can't ask your partner if they've been tested recently, why are you sleeping with them? Like this I'm not saying a lot new. Now, what I will say is that the numbers have come down since those videos. For instance, black women used to be above 50% of the new HIV cases in America. They dropped by 42%. Yet somehow the numbers still come out that of new cases among women overall, 6 out of 10 are black women. I also ask another important question when I do HIV education, which is, how many people do you have to sleep with to potentially be infected? I'm gonna be quiet for a moment, let y'all think about that. I'm even actually looking at the chat, so if anybody in there wants to answer, feel free. While I'm looking at the chat, yes, HIV is in fact a business. Let's not get that wrong at all. People who deny the existence of HIV virus are dangerous. I'm not even going to acknowledge that. Like, okay, so you cannot fly to get tested in New York. And you cannot, let me phrase that. So there are two types of tests. There's a rapid test that gives you an answer in about 15 minutes. When a rapid test is done, most states require that it be confirmed with a blood test. The rapid test is the swab test you hear about in your mouth. 15 minutes comes back, they tell you. Let me tell you, longest 15 minutes of your life, not gonna lie. But it's better than the 3 days it used to be. Yeah, 3 days. And in some areas, you're still doing 3 days. Rapid tests in lots of areas are only available for people who are considered at risk. And I love all of you who answered the question correctly. The answer of how many people you have to sleep with unprotected to potentially be HIV positive is 1. So let's not talk about, 17 is actually a low number, which really impresses me when someone comes to me with, like, they're like, and they'll say it like 17! Like, wow. Now, I love Q&As. This is actually my area. If we cannot prove the virus exists, how can we say it's real? Well, I'd like to ask you to show me where we've said we can't prove the virus exists, because we can. We have. We can visually identify it in a microscope. So, yeah, once again, I'm addressing someone because not addressing the racism in the pharmaceutical industry. Have you missed it? Yes! The racism in the pharmaceutical industry is blatant. And the affordability is both racism and classism. If you can keep the fact that we allow patents on life-saving medicines to last as long as they do, tells you who we care about. And it is not, that kid with HIV who just walked into the clinic and got the worst news of his life. That he's terrified to go back and tell his family because they're going to assume things that may not be true. And God forbid I have to hear one more thing. An auntie or uncle taught somebody about HIV that was absolutely off point. I can't believe we're still even arguing. I can't believe there's someone that's sitting here saying that HIV isn't real. Tell that to the, I don't use the term LGBTQ, by the way. We'll use the term GSRM. It is gender, sexual, romantic minorities. It's more inclusive, and frankly, it's less letters, and they don't keep adding to it. It's lazy. Tell the GSRM community that only recently started having elders. So we know HIV is real. We're just going to move on from that concept. If you don't think HIV is real, I think you should have to wear a shirt that says, I don't believe in HIV on every date. Because I bet you don't tell anybody you go on a date you don't believe HIV is real. And if you do and they still sleep with you, I want to know how you say it. I'm just curious. Like, how are you phrasing that?
You're assuming they get dates.
That it, I assume people. I assume anybody can get a date. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I mean, it's an assumption. I assume everybody can get a date. If you can get a date wearing a shirt saying I have had unprotected sex with people and I don't believe in HIV, now that's a whole different story, because that's a whole matter. So yeah, let's. That's me putting the chat down. I'm not even looking at the chat anymore. Yeah. Racism with the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, let's talk about what they do, even in how their drug testing. Minority communities are the most at risk. But when you participate in one of those studies, you need to ask a lot of questions so that you understand exactly not just what you're doing, but how the data is being used. I'm not going to go into all that, but here's one of the important questions. I've noticed lately with studies that they are specifically targeting high-risk people with the PrEP vaccine. If you look at this study, the reason they're choosing high-risk people is it means they're more likely to go have unprotected sex, thinking that the vaccine that they're testing is going to protect them, so they can get an accurate reading without actually injecting them with, syphilis like they did in Tuskegee. That's no better. That is not a better way to find a solution. We know they're doing risky behavior. Let's encourage those people to come in, but tell them we're giving them something that potentially is a vaccine against HIV and send them back out on the streets. So basically, you're using them as guinea pigs. And if you don't understand that in some of the studies, it's not going to get better for you. And yeah, they pay well. I know. I've looked at the numbers. You can almost make a living as doing some of the drug studies for HIV. So, that's a big deal. The other one I want to talk about is the stigma. But to really show you how dangerous the stigma is, I'm going to get Matthew to cue up the next video.
Last year, the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta announced that for the first time, more than 1 million Americans are infected with HIV. Almost half of them are black. As a scientist, you've been working on HIV/AIDS from just about the beginning.
Yes.
Almost a quarter century.
Right.
Did you see this coming in the black American community?
Yes. You could see it coming. All you have to do is just sit down and think about it in pure, cold, infectious disease terms. It's a infectious disease that's transmitted by sexual contact, both homosexual sex, men who have sex with men, heterosexual contact, and injection drug use. So the handwriting was on the wall for quite a long time.
If the government's most important AIDS scientists could see this crisis coming so clearly, why has there been no government policy or program aimed specifically at stopping the epidemic in black America?
I mean, I'm figuring y'all can answer that question. So, the leading scientist who was advising President Clinton, because that's where that guy's from, says the writing was on the wall. Now, I want y'all to remember the 90s, the glories of the first black president, as I believe he was often referred to. Now, I say that with a hint of contempt. I can't really say that because I did it too. But when he got into office and found out all the problems, jails, mass incarceration, what did he do? Why, he signed bills that increased all those numbers. When Bill Clinton left office, he was considered by some in the black community to have been the best advocate for the black community there had been in a presidency. And the problem is, that's probably true. I mean, that's probably the truth. So let's look at, you know what I mean? Yeah. So I mean, when those were your your choices, Bill Clinton probably was, for black people, the best advocate we had had in the White House. Now, since Bill Clinton, we have had several other presidents that have not been considered very good advocates for the black community and haven't particularly done a lot for HIV. Then we had the audacity to hope that we'd finally had our advocate, that we finally had the right person in office to make the changes that needed to be made for black people in all the areas. And he was clearly focused on healthcare. He blew all of his political collateral, term one, on universal healthcare. Our HIV numbers went up for 8 years in the black community. It didn't go down. Now, tell me again about hope and audacity, or the audacity of hope. A lot of book tours, a lot of parties, a lot of AIDS. And that's the basis of that. Michael Johnson is a case I have followed from the day he got arrested. It's important, not just because he's a young black man, but there's some important facts about that case and the criminalization of HIV, which all add to the disincentivizing being tested that we need to look at. One, the fact that he was convicted because he couldn't prove he was innocent. One of the, and yes, I'm going to do this, victims testified in court that he believed he contracted HIV from Johnson. He also said he confronted Johnson about being positive, even though he believed Johnson had transmitted the virus to him. He repeatedly had consensual, unprotected sex with Johnson. So clearly, he wasn't really all that concerned. So what makes this case important? Well, this case happened right outside of St. Louis at, I'm going to mispronounce that school's name, Muzzy, what? Mike's, all I know is Mike Sam went, Mike Sam went there. Muzzy, University of Missouri. I can't remember what your nickname is, sorry. When this young man was arrested in class in front of his classmates, and it announced what he was being charged with as he was escorted out, he had been a star wrestler. He had no visitors from the school, from his team, or from his coaching staff. They immediately distanced themselves. Now, we've talked about the use of black bodies to make money in sports and how little concern gets shown on the back end. But before this man had been convicted, his peers and friends had walked away. So tell me again what we're doing to say to people they should get tested. Now, admittedly, Michael never stood a chance. The deck was stacked against him. And I'm going to give you a few points that are great. I'm actually going to hold my phone so I can look at you as I give you these. So when news broke of the case where a black college wrestler who called himself Tiger Mandingo was being accused by 4 white and 2 black accusers in the St. Louis suburb of St. Charles, Missouri, which has a 91% race white, 91% of the population is white. It quickly became a racially charged case. Imagine that. Not only is he having sex with men, but he's having sex with white men. Daddies don't like that a lot. I'm not speaking from experience or anything. I'm hearing you. 2 of 51 potential jurors, only 1 appeared to be non-white. Half of the jurors admitted they believed being gay was a choice. All were identified as straight and HIV negative. 2/3 of the jury admitted to believing that being gay was a sin. Prosecution emphasized the risk of transmitting HIV even when the still showed low-risk activities such as giving oral sex or sex acts that cannot transmit HIV, such as when a man was videotaped stimulating Mr. Johnson without a condom. No risk there. Well, unless his hand is a giant open scar, no risk there. I mean, I'm sure you're going to go like, oh, there's risk there. If he's got a gaping, bleeding, open wound here while he's doing it, yes, there's a risk. But if he's doing that while he has the wound, there are other issues we should be talking about. In the closing argument, she normally does this to me when I'm producing and I'm on this side of the camera. It's way harder on this side. I'm now determined that I need to convince Irony that everyone in the group needs to have this experience at least once. Of course, actually, we may want to keep that one off. yeah. She's probably not one we want to put on camera. In closing arguments, prosecutors said this case was worse than murder cases he tried. Because a murder is when someone is hit by a bullet and dies. If only we could get that standard applied to when police shoot unarmed black men, that'd be kind of nice. I mean, that's his own quote. He said, murder is when someone is hit by a bullet and dies. I don't know how many people have been let go. I know that 2 at max have been convicted, and they were both also minority officers. So, yeah, we'll go there. But HIV has an agenda. Yes, the virus has an agenda. Apparently, viruses get agendas now. I'm just telling you what he said in his closing argument that wasn't on appeal determined to be a lie and biasing and misleading. HIV has an agenda. It's to make a copy, make as many copies of itself as possible. I wouldn't call that an agenda. That is how the virus works. Calling it an agenda makes the virus sound a little bit more intelligent than we think viruses are. It's amazing that, people don't believe. There's so many people in this area who believe being gay is a choice, but they also believe a virus has a master agenda. Get back to me on that. In Johnson, the virus could not have had a more accommodating host. A young man who had unprotected sex with one young man after another and they were probably promiscuous, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. He's finished. So the prosecution uses blatant things to bias the jury, not facts, not a single fact. And somehow this 23-year-old who, for all we know, did in fact tell every one of his partners. We know at least one of them believed he was HIV positive, one who he was convicted for transmitting it to, but they kept having sex with him. Justice for all. So, that's just a basic list of what we're doing wrong with HIV. There are a wide range of things I can still touch on about the stigma attached to men who have sex with men for whatever reason. Here's what I will say. You can keep that stigma going, and you're going to keep creating environments where they think they have to lie to you about what they've been, who they've been with and what they've done. Or you can create an environment where we are honest and clear that we care about them more than who they sleep with, so that they can talk to us, get the help they need. There is a last video that I want you all to see, because I think it's pretty important. It tells its own story. And I want to thank you guys for watching. Point of note, none of this would be possible without the wonderful Broderick Flanagan of Flanagan Portrait Studios in Athens, Georgia, and Enlightened Media Productions. Irony goes through Broderick. He has a list he goes through. I'm gonna be a little different with Broderick. That picture is probably one of the best pictures that captures the soul of Broderick. Like that is not a pose. That is a life. That is how he does things. I am lucky to work with Broderick on several projects, and I'm not upset about working with him on any of them. As a matter of fact, Broderick's one of the few people that I've ever said, if you feel like I need to be somewhere, just tell me I need to be there and I'll be there. I don't like other people making my schedule. And he's been given open permission. Not only is he great for the Athens community, he's actually, you know what, being great for the Athens community, should be good enough. But he does a lot more. He teaches art classes for all ages. And I'm looking at the art around me. Trust me, it's all amazing. There may be a member of the studio audience and I arguing about a piece right after this show is over. So I'd like to thank him for making this possible and all the other things he makes possible. I'm gonna brag on Broderick a little bit, actually. And he is a pretty humble, modest guy, which makes one of us. Broderick is working with me on a project that there are moments I pause and go, what was I thinking? How am I going to pull this off? And the project was born because I asked Broderick a question, real simple question. With everything you know about the system, the world we live in, even just here in Athens, Georgia, how do you keep hope? And he kind of smiled and looked at me and he's like, hope? Brother, hope is for things I can't control. I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. Things I control, I get up and do something about. HIV is something we can do something about. There's no reason for it to continue the way it has. If you need information, I will make sure that my social media platform contact information is added to the description. I am always open to questions. If you want to remain anonymous, I actually use the Ask FM app. I don't even know if anyone uses that app anymore. I get a lot of questions there, not about HIV. But if you have questions you want to ask, send them to me. I will answer them. That is a priority for me, not just previously as a gay man, but now an HIV positive gay man. But as someone who just knows we can do better. So that's it. That's what I got for you today. Oh, no. I almost forgot that I wanted to do a shout out. Army came up with the idea of shouting out black businesses in Athens every week. And I did not want that to be something that was not done the week he was gone. So this week we are shouting out Naughty by Nature Natural Hair Salon. You can find them at www.naughtybynaturehairsalon.com. I was in there with the ladies yesterday. They weren't doing anything. They didn't do this. I did this. They will be doing this, but don't blame them for this. Don't use me as an example. Don't be like, oh, look at it. I'm not going to them. No. They are where I will be going from now on. So when you see me and it's not crazy, you'll know it was thanks to, Naughty by Nature. I'm just saying. But check them out. They are a very entertaining group of ladies. And not in that gossip sort of way. Like they and I'll say this as a black man. We think we have the lock on certain types of conversations in barbershops. And we just assume that ladies are just gossiping. Let me tell you, every one of those women was very aware of the type of things I was talking about, like talking about what I was going to do today. They were on top of it. So support them if you're here in Athens. All about natural hair. Thanks for coming. I'm going to leave you with this last video. And Iron Me will be back next week. During my YouTube days, I ended videos with a quick saying that I will return to, which is a belief. Live your life so you love your life. That's what matters. Peace.
Becoming especially clear in black communities in the South, where according to the CDC, AIDS is spreading fastest. Places like Williamston, North Carolina.
HIV and AIDS is the new story of the South. It is the new story. It is so disturbing to me when I get another young sister to walk up in this office and say, "Can I talk to you?" And then she pull me aside and say, "I'm HIV infected."
Donna Latimer runs an HIV counseling center in Williamston, where almost all the new clients are women. That demographic imbalance of men to women is especially pronounced here because unemployment is rampant. Several major factories in the area have shut down in the last few years, and small local businesses can't survive. So most men who can get work somewhere else leave town.
If you implant an African-American male in this community that makes over minimum wage, and women find out about him, I guarantee you at least 50 women are going to go after him, at least.
According to the state health department, black women have an HIV infection rate 14 times higher than white women in North Carolina, and some misguided attempts to avoid the disease, according to Donna Latimer, are making things worse.
I've seen people develop group sex teams because they said that they won't be putting each other at risk because we know everybody, so we can have sex with each other. But what happens when one member of that group is already infected? Then you infect the whole group.
This small clinic, like many in the rural South, is overwhelmed with AIDS patients. Many are women like Kenesha, who says she was only involved with one man, the father of her child. But she tested positive for HIV 3 years ago.
The men that you deal with, you don't trust them because they won't tell you the truth. So I just went and got tested. And when I first found out, I tried to commit suicide.
AIDS is still a shameful but deadly secret in Williamston.
A lot of people died. A lot of them had died around me. Approximately 10 to 15 that I'm friends with.
It is impossible to know how many here have actually died of AIDS, because often when someone dies of AIDS, the notice in the local paper reports the cause was cancer. The man who Kenesha says infected her also had a wife and other children. He died of AIDS over a year ago.
The epidemic is real, it's spreading. Women, protect yourself, because you don't know who that person been with, so just protect yourself.
A warning, but is anyone listening? The shocking reality is that of all women newly infected with HIV in the United States, 68% are black.
If this was about white women, white college students, white youngsters, white anybody, there would be a different response. They used to have a saying that said, silence equals death. Well, if that is still true, then this silence is deafening. And it's saying to us, it does equal death. And for you guys, that seems to be all right.